There is a kind of sorrow that never announces itself. It moves quietly like a shadow that stays close, even in the brightest rooms. A sadness carried by people who learned far too young how heavy the world can be. Some call it resilience. Some call it maturity. But beneath the praise lies something softer, more fragile, and rarely spoken about. The silent grief of outgrowing childhood before the body was even done growing. Because for some, childhood isn't a memory. It's an ache, a place they never really got to live in. And this grief, it lingers. It often starts with a simple realization. Not dramatic, not sudden. Just a quiet, private awareness that something feels different. They listen to others talk about childhood with warmth. Sleepovers, play, recklessness, moments of being held, guided, protected, and somewhere in their chest there is a pause, a small wordless distance, because their childhood wasn't a time of innocence. It was a time of responsibility, a time of understanding too much and being cared for too little, a time when growing up wasn't a choice, but a survival strategy. People don't always recognize this grief in themselves. They only feel the exhaustion, the premature seriousness, the way happiness often feels like something they must earn. They don't call it grief, but their body remembers. Children grow fast, but only some grow early. Some are born into storms, homes filled with tension, illness, addiction, or financial struggle. Parents overwhelmed or absent, emotions left unattended. Others carry the role of the peacekeeper, the caretaker, the translator of the family's chaos. They learn to make themselves small so others can breathe easier. They learn to stay alert, always aware of changes in tone and temperature. They learn to hold in their own tears because someone else's were louder. These children aren't allowed to be children. Not in the way childhood was meant to be lived. Not in the way it naturally unfolds. Their early maturity is not a gift. It is an inheritance, a transfer of burdens that were never theirs. And this early inheritance has a cost. The slow, quiet loss of what childhood could have been. Psychologists call it parentification. A developmental inversion where the child becomes the emotional or practical caretaker of the parent. Not metaphorically, functionally. Research shows that when children are placed in adult roles too early, their nervous system adapts. They become hyper-vigilant, more attuned to threat, more sensitive to others' emotions. It shapes the architecture of the brain, especially areas tied to stress and self-regulation. They learn responsibility before they learn trust, independence before safety, strength before softness. Even as adults, they carry an internal script that says, I have to manage everything. I can't rely on anyone. I must stay calm even when I'm breaking. My needs are secondary. It's not intentional. It's conditioning. And conditioning, especially the kind learned in childhood, roots itself deeply. And this is why the grief feels so quiet, so persistent, so hard to articulate. And it isn't sadness over something that happened. It's sadness over something that never did. As adults, these individuals often appear capable, composed, responsible, the ones others lean on. They're praised for their strength, their maturity, their ability to stay steady under pressure. But internally, there is conflict. A part of them longs for simplicity, for softness, for childlike joy. A desire to let go, even briefly. Yet another part resists. Be careful. Don't rely too much on that. Don't relax too deeply. You should be doing more. This resistance is not logical. It's protective. The child who had no room to collapse now becomes the adult who doesn't know how to rest. And it creates a strange duality. They crave comfort, yet feel unworthy of it. They yearn for support, yet fear becoming a burden. They admire people who are carefree, yet feel disconnected from them. They are adults outside, but inside lives a child who never had the freedom to simply be. The turning point is rarely dramatic. It usually begins with softness, a moment when someone treats them gently, or a moment when life slows down and they don't know what to do with the quiet, or a moment when they witness how children are supposed to be cared for, and something tightens inside them. A subtle truth rises to the surface. They never got that, and the grief becomes clear, not because they want to blame anyone, not because they are stuck in the past, but because they finally understand. The weight they carried, the innocence they left behind, the childhood that had to be sacrificed. This realization can feel like an exhale they've been holding for years, a recognition of the child they were and the adult they became, without ever choosing the transition. In that moment, the grief becomes real, not a weakness, a truth. Healing is not about recreating childhood. It is about acknowledging its absence. It begins with giving language to what was lost. Not to rewrite the past, but to befriend the child who lived through it. Integration happens slowly, almost invisibly, through tiny acts of softness, through rest without guilt, through letting others help even in small ways, through learning that safety can exist without vigilance, through recognizing that needs are not flaws. For some, healing is the simple act of sitting with the younger self, the one who had to grow up too quickly, and saying, "You shouldn't have had to do all that. You deserve gentleness. You get to have softness now." Not advice, not correction, just acknowledgement. Because the grief of an unlived childhood does not disappear. It transforms. It becomes a quiet companion, a reminder of what they survived, and of the freedom they are allowed to reclaim in fragments. Healing is not dramatic. It is tender, slow, almost invisible from the outside. But inside, it feels like finally being allowed to breathe. In the end, the grief remains silent, not because it is small, but because it is sacred. Those who outgrew childhood too early are not defined by what they lost, but by the depth it created in them. A depth that understands fragility, a depth that listens gently, a depth that carries compassion as second nature. They are not broken, they are not incomplete. They are simply people who met adulthood long before they met safety. And as they move through the world, they learn to build the softness they never received, piece by piece, moment by moment. Somewhere along the way, the grief shifts. It no longer feels like a weight, but a quiet truth they can hold without shaking. A reminder that even in the absence of a childhood, a person can still grow into someone tender, someone aware, someone whole. And in that wholeness, there is a kind of peace that finally feels like coming home.